So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. It is 10:33 a.m. and welcome everybody to our first TARPO meeting of 2022. I'm Teresa Thompson, the chair of the RTCC. And I think first on the agenda is the roll call.
All right. So based on what I see in the participant list, it looks like it is myself, Matt Day, Teresa Thompson from Pittsburgh, Tamara Niegavon from Division 7, Joel Strickland from Moore County, Kathy Vollert from Division 8, Tom Tenike from Orange County, Matt Kitchen from Division 8, Jack Meadows from Siler City, Brandon Dawson from Chatham County, Brian Kluchar from Division 8, Julie Bogle from Transportation Planning Division, and Danielle Orloff from Aberdeen. And I see Morgan DeWitt is just joining from Pittsburgh. So is there anybody on the line whose name I did not read off? All right.
Okay, so next on the agenda is the purpose of today's meeting.
So we have one decision item today, which is an amendment to our current year planning work program. But then we have a number of discussion and information items. And we do have a few presentations that'll take place during the joint RTCC, RTAC section at lunchtime. So any questions or changes to the agenda?
Okay, hearing none, we'll go on to the next item, which is public comment. So if anybody from the public would like to speak, you can go ahead and unmute yourself now. Okay. Sounds like no one. And moving on to approval of the minutes from December the 9th. Does anyone have any comments or changes that need to be made to the minutes? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
This is Brandon, motion to approve.
This is Jack, second.
Okay, thank you, Jack.
Okay, I will run down the roll, and if you could just say yes to approve or no to not approve. So Matt Day, yes. Teresa Thompson.
Yes.
Joel Strickland.
Yes.
Tom Tenike.
Yes.
Jack Meadows.
Yes.
Brandon Dawson.
Yes.
Brian Kluchar.
Yes.
Julie Bogle.
Yes.
Danielle Orloff.
Yes.
That is unanimous.
All right. So like Matt said, we just have the one decision item, 5A, approval of mid-year amendment to the fiscal year 22 work plan, amendment number 3.
All right. So this is the time of year that I typically try to do, a big amendment, kind of look at what our spending has looked like through the first half of the year, and then suggest shifting money around within the budget, looking at things that were under perform, we're tracking to come in low or tracking to come in high, and shifting money around. So, excuse me. The overall amount of money that is in the work program doesn't change. We just sort of shift it between tasks. And what I have recommended is to reduce a number of items and increase a few others. So reducing the prioritization line by 7,500. That is due to the cancellation of P6. We originally, we currently have 12,500 budgeted for that item. And as of mid-year, we'd only spent about 2,000. So taking 7,500 out and only leaving 5,000 in that line seems pretty reasonable, given that we shouldn't have much going on in that line. Then also reducing the program and project development line by 2,000. We currently have 9,500 budgeted for that line. Based on spending in the first half of the year, we'd only spent about 3,500. So, 9,500 seemed a bit high. So that would get us more on track for what we're seeing so far this year. Then also reducing the travel direct cost line by $500. Obviously, there's just haven't been a whole lot of in-person meetings this year, so there hasn't been a whole lot of driving going on. So that one's kind of a no-brainer. And then the two that would increase would be the general transportation planning line. That would increase by 3,500. And that is primarily due to two things. One being the spot work group that has been meeting to figure out the procedure for how we're going to deal with things now that P6 isn't happening. We hadn't expected that to happen this year. And then we also have some administrative tasks related to administering our Second Avenue SPR study, which we hadn't included in the original PWP last spring because we didn't know yet at that time if we were getting that study. So increasing the general transportation planning line for that. And then also increasing the administrative activities by 6,500. And that is mainly just looking at what we've spent through the first half of the year. We were very quickly going to burn through the budget on that, and so it made sense to shift some money into that. I think there's a couple of reasons why that might be higher this year than it may have been in the past. One being just a lot more sort of background legwork in terms of handling virtual meetings, and when we were trying to figure out how to do the hybrid meetings, and just a lot of sort of non-typical logistical stuff we had to do this year. And then also we did some relatively substantive changes to the website recently that weren't in the original PWP as well. So those are my recommended changes. And what we would be seeking is a recommendation to the RTAC to approve.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Does anyone have any questions for Matt? Okay. Do we have a recommendation to approve amendment number 3?
I'll make a motion to approve. This is Joel.
Okay, thank you. And do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second it, Teresa. Tom, 10 Ike, Orange County.
Okay, thank you. All right,
All right.
Matt.
Okay, Matt Day, yes. Teresa Thompson,
Yes.
Joel Strickland,
Yes.
Tom Tenike,
Yes.
Jack Meadows,
Yes.
Brandon Dawson,
Yes.
Brian Kluchar,
Yes.
Julie Bogle,
Yes.
Danielle Orloff.
Yes.
All right, that is unanimous. And that is the last thing we have to vote on, thankfully.
But we have how many? 6 discussion items, so.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on, 6A, the 2024 to 2023 STIP development process discussion.
All right, so I know that at our last meeting back in December, I kind of shared with you all the scores that had come out from P6 and all that, and I said we were hoping that by February we'd have, sort of firmed up what the process for the development of the next step is going to be, and we are really, really, really close. So I'm going to share with you sort of what's been put together. There's a couple of outstanding issues, but they're relatively minor and not really critical paths. So we have sort of the major framework for how this is going to work. So just as a reminder, NCDOT did announce last summer that they were going to be stopping the prioritization 6.0 process. And the reason for doing that was that when they looked at their costs of projects that were in the existing STIP document and then anticipated revenues, they saw that the projects that were already in the STIP were going to cost more than what the anticipated revenue was. And so there was no reason to be going through a process to try to select new projects because there was going to be no money for new projects. And in fact, we were going to have to go through a process to remove projects from the STIP because there were too many. So since that time, the prioritization work group has, which is sort of the work group set up by DOT with members from various DOT units, from MPOs, RPOs, various sort of, the County Commissioners Association and the Metro Mayors Association and all these groups. They all have members on this work group. And that's the group that comes up with the recommendations to the Board of Transportation for how to do the prioritization process. So that group has been meeting since last summer to develop this recommended methodology that we're going to talk about today. And just as a point of reference, the current STIP document covers the years 2020 through 2029, and the new one is going to be covering 2024 through 2033. That's a little weird for us. We usually do a new STIP every 2 years, but this process has been, there's been so many issues along the way in this process. It was delayed a couple of times, then it was canceled. So that's why we're looking at a 4-year window. The expectation is that when we get through this one and we get back to more of a normal pattern, we'll be back on an every 2-year pattern. We do expect that we should receive what they're calling a preliminary draft. So not the actual draft, but a preliminary draft of the STIP this spring. The actual draft STIP would come later in the year, probably more like fall, winter kind of time frame. And then the final STIP adoption would happen next summer. So that's when they typically release the draft, and then they have to go through all their various, federal approvals and air quality conformity and all the sort of red tape stuff that they have to go through. So they don't get a final adopted version until summer of 23. And around that same time that final STIP is being adopted is around the same time that we'll be starting up the process for P7, which will be the next round in terms of submitting projects to be scored. So that's sort of the general timeline we're looking at. And now what I'm going to go through is sort of what's been decided about how this process is going to work. So there's been 3 main decisions made by the prioritization work group, and all 3 of these have been confirmed by the Board of Transportation. So the first decision was what's sort of the overall method for developing this new STIP. There were a couple ideas about, should this be an opportunity to sort of rethink what the STIP is, and should we divide it into 2 separate STIPs? But at the end of the day, the decision was, no, we're just going to stick with what we know. We're going to create a STIP document that is similar to the way that we've done it in the past. So it's a 10-year STIP document, and kind of move on. The second decision was related to what we're calling the delivery project set. So this is a set of projects that are sort of near-term projects that would be automatically carried forward into the next STIP. So the idea is that there's some projects that are far enough along in the process that they should just automatically be included. And then there's other projects that we have to evaluate whether they should be included or not. So that's the third step. The third decision was, what method are we going to use to evaluate which of those remaining projects should be in or out of the STIP? So, those were the 3 decisions. But then when I think of it in terms of the steps that we have to go through, there's sort of 3 steps. And the first step is going and getting that delivery project set. So this is the set of near-term projects that will automatically be included in the new STIP. And these are sort of the rules that were put in place for how to determine that list of projects. It's going to be any project that is scheduled to let for construction in fiscal year 26 or sooner. Any project that has right-of-way underway now or has its right-of-way scheduled prior to fiscal year 24.
Okay.
And then any project that has an attachment to grant funding, because lots of times they'll use STIP projects as like match for getting grant funding for some other project. And so they don't want to mess up any of that grant stuff. So anything that's in that type of situation, those are also automatic. And these decisions are going to be based on the dates as they are in the current STIP document. So I think one of the things that is really important to understand about this is that we know that a lot of the dates in the current STIP document are not realistic at this point. But those are the dates they're going to use for the purpose of doing this analysis. Those dates will almost certainly end up changing in the new STIP document that comes out. So just because the current STIP says your project is going to let for construction in 25, and so therefore it ends up on the delivery project set, does not mean that in the new STIP your project's still going to let for construction in 25. It might not. So just all that means is that based on that number, it made the cut to get into the STIP. So any questions about that before we move on?
Hey, Matt, I think I heard it correct. Those 3 bullet points you mentioned, those are or statements, right?
Yes, if it meets any of those 3, then it's in the delivery set. All right. So then the next step in the process is to evaluate the committed projects that are remaining. So one of the early decisions that was made was that for the purposes of putting this new STIP document together, any project that was a non-committed project in the previous STIP was automatically going to be taken off the table. We were only going to be looking at the committed projects from the previous STIP because in almost every case, there may have been 1 or 2 divisions, but in almost every case, even if you took the non-committed projects off, there was still a funding shortage. So it didn't make sense to include any of those non-committed projects. So we would take all of the previously committed projects that didn't make it into the delivery project set, and they would go through what we're calling the P3, P4, P5 method. So the idea here is that the older a project is and the higher that it scored, the more likely that it gets to remain in the STIP. So we'll start by looking at all the projects that were committed back in P3, rank them in order from highest to lowest score, and go down the list until we run out of money. If we get all the way through all the P3 projects, then we move on to P4 projects, do the same thing, rank them from highest to lowest score, and run down the list until we run out of money. And so that's sort of how this will work. You know, if you get through all your P4 and you still have money, then you go to your P5 projects. And the idea there is just that it's favoring the projects that have been in the process for the longest time. So that is how that process will work. The thing to understand is that, you know, we have the 22 funding buckets. There's the statewide bucket, the 7 regional buckets, and the 14 division buckets. Each of those funding buckets is going to have a different amount of remaining funds left over for this evaluation method. So what I've got on the screen right now is the current estimate, and these numbers they change all the time. They change every month, but at least based on current estimates, looking at their current cost estimates and their current revenue estimates, this is the amount of money that would be available for these projects that are being evaluated here in step 2 for each of the buckets that we're in. So Region D, Region E, Division 7, and Division 8. It looks like a lot of money, but I will go ahead and tell you that it's less money than the current total amount that's, would cost to build what's in the current STIP. So there will be projects that get removed. One important thing to note about all of this, so including both the delivery set projects and the step 2 projects that go through P4, P3, P4, P5. NCDOT is just sort of going to take these projects and develop a new STIP. It'll have a new schedule, and a decision has not yet been made about how we're going to decide which projects in that new STIP are committed and which ones are not committed. And we may be changing terminology about whether we call things committed or not. There's a lot still being discussed about this. So the work group has made a recommendation to the Board of Transportation that anything that falls within the first 5 years of the new STIP would be committed, and anything that is in the second 5 years would not be committed. But the Board of Transportation has not yet made a decision about whether they're going to follow that recommendation or do something different. So that is one of those remaining things that's sort of not critical path. It doesn't affect like current timelines on getting this done, but it does affect things down the line. So just to put that out there. So just in summary, what would be in the new STIP is anything that's pre 24, because the new STIP is starting in 24. So anything that's pre 24 that's going to have funds carrying over into the new time period, that's in. Anything that's in that delivery set, that's in. And then anything from the sort of recompete process that got selected through that P3, P4, P5, those are in. What's out is anything that didn't make it through that recompete process, and then anything that was previously a non-committed project. And yeah, so any questions about that before we jump into this next piece on flexibility? Okay. So the other sort of piece that has been approved as part of this process is what's being called flexibility. So NCDOT is going to provide each of the MPOs and RPOs and divisions with a preliminary draft STIP, where they're going to go through the methodology, the steps we just talked about, and come up with the list of, okay, here's what would be in, here's what would be out, here's sort of what that schedule looks like. The MPOs, RPOs, and divisions would then have an opportunity to discuss whether there are things we would like to swap or change within that preliminary draft. The idea being, for example, if you had Project A that did make it into the STIP and Project B did not make it into the STIP, but your area thinks that B is the higher priority, then you could say, we'd like to remove Project A and replace it with Project B. So we'll be able to have those kinds of discussions, but there's definitely some guardrails on sort of how this works, and I'm going to go through those on the next slide. We'll also be allowed to request changes in terms of schedule swaps, like Project A is scheduled for year 26 and Project B is scheduled for year 30, and we think that they should be swapped. We can do those types of things as well. Again, there's some guardrails on that. You can't, if it's physically impossible for DOT to build that thing in 26 because it's going to take them 5 years to get through the environmental documents, then it can't be done. But in general, we can have those discussions about those types of things. The idea is that this would allow us to have some local input into this process and address any priorities that may have changed over time. Because if you remember the way our process from the previous slide works, it favors the older projects. So it's possible that that older project really just isn't a priority for you anymore. And so this is sort of the opportunity to have those types of discussions. This is completely optional. The discussions would probably happen over the summer. We're expecting, hopefully, to get those preliminary draft lists sometime in like March, April, but I'm not holding my breath. But the idea is that these discussions would happen over the summer, and then that would give DOT time to then put together the actual real draft document in the fall. One thing to be very clear about, this is not an opportunity to add new projects that weren't previously on the STIP. So we could theoretically swap in a non-committed project that was on the previous STIP, but we can't swap in something that wasn't on the previous STIP at all. Okay, so here are sort of the general rules we've got to work within. All swaps and schedule adjustments have to be agreed to by all the affected MPOs, RPOs, and divisions where the project is located. So if it's a project that is completely within TARPO and completely within, I'll just say, Division 8, then we would have to get TARPO and Division 8 to agree. If it's a project that is partially in TARPO, partially in CAMPO, partially in Division 8, partially in Division 5, and we have one of those, we'd have to get all 4 of those to agree. For swaps, the swapped in project can't cost more than 10% more than what the swapped out project costs. So you can't take out a $50 million project and replace it with a $100 million project, but you could theoretically request to swap out that $50 million project for a $55 million project. The swaps generally should stay within their funding bucket, so a statewide, regional, or division bucket. There is a possibility of cascading down, but I'm not really thinking that's something we'd probably do here. That's really complicated. You can swap projects between modes, so you can say take out a airport project and replace it with a highway project or bike ped project or whatever, as long as the normalization thresholds are still met. So DOT has some rules in place as far as the overall STIP document. Within each region and within each division, they have to have at least 90% of the funds going to highway and at least 4% going to non-highway. And then there's 6% that's flexible. So as long as they can stay within those required percentages, you can swap between modes. And then we also have to document our justification for any swaps that we make. So that's a lot. Without knowing sort of what our project list is, it's hard to start having these discussions. And even once we know what our project list is, it might be hard to start having these discussions. But I want you all to know that that this is out there. We will probably set up some sort of a process to like gather feedback from y'all if there are projects you would like us to consider for swaps. I don't know exactly how it'll work, but we'll have to kind of work through that over the next few months. I think that's my last slide on this. Yeah. So any questions about this? I know it was a lot.
So at what point would we be able to discuss new projects?
So new projects, will have to wait until P7. So we'll be likely, and the P7 schedule has not even really been discussed yet, but my guess, based on past experience, is that we will probably be submitting new projects for scoring in P7 sometime in mid 2023. So we will probably start having our subcommittee, like we've done in the past. We'll probably have them start meeting maybe this winter, this coming, next winter, to start preparing for that.
And what would be the anticipated stip years for that one again?
So that would be a 26 through 35 step for P7.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Matt?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or just like kind of a thought, but I know I'm still like relatively new since I haven't gone through a full normal spot cycle since I've been a member of the group. But I guess Matt, like from the 50,000 or 100,000 foot view, do you anticipate that like if we're going to lose a bunch of things, because of everything that's transpired, costs and whatnot, that when we go back to the process, it's going to look markedly different, that similar projects that would have ended up with similar scores are not just going to coalesce at the same points on, the table that they would anyway? Do we anticipate there being a lot of repetition, even though we've gone through, a lot of culling over these next couple of years, or do we anticipate that it will look drastically different and therefore should be focusing on something, as we consider what the next round might include? And that was super loaded, so I apologize.
Yeah, I think my past experience would suggest that it depends. There are certainly times, and it also kind of depends on each community and the approach that they take, because we, when we're coming up with our list of projects that we want to submit, we usually set up a subcommittee, and then within that subcommittee, we usually basically set some rules and say, okay, each county can submit X number of projects, and now you, Orange County, go out and figure out what, 6 or 7 or however many projects. You figure out what you want us to submit, and we kind of typically have gone through it that way in the past. And I will say, some communities tend to resubmit the same things every time because that's their priorities and that's what they want to submit. And then other communities will look at sort of past performance and say, that project didn't score great, or, that's not really a high priority for us anymore. And their list changes every time. So it's really hard to say.
I appreciate that. I think that makes complete sense. And I guess I'll talk a little bit as well with Nish and Tame about it and see has the trend been fairly similar from the Orange County end, and how that might inform what would come.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Alrighty, so we'll move on to 6B, which is preparation for fiscal year 23 planning work program.
All right, so this is another item that I always bring every February. I'm required to turn in a draft of our work program for next year to DOT by the end of this month. They have to review it, and then we come back at the April meeting, and you actually see the actual PWP document that's been reviewed, and we put it out for approval. So what I usually try to do at the February meeting is ask for any feedback or guidance that you all may have about things that you would like to see included in next year's work program. Are there particular tasks or studies or things that you are aware of in your community that you want to make sure we're including in there? So, for example, past examples, this year I think we have an item in there for a parking study in Aberdeen. We have, obviously Aberdeen's working on their bike and ped plan, so we've got a line in there saying, support that. We've got CTPs underway in a number of counties, so it's those types of things. Like, what are there any items where you're aware that you're going to need the RPO's support on something next year? That's the type of feedback we're looking for today. I will say I will post the draft PWP on our website later this month at the same time that I send it into DOT. That is something required in our public involvement plan to put it out there for public comment. And so that'll be posted sometime later this month, and then it'll be presented at our April meetings.
Hey, Matt, this is Brandon from Chatham County. When you say opportunities where we're looking for support from the RPO to be placed in the PWP, are you referencing like financial support or support from the staff themselves?
Staff. So the RPO, with one exception, does not have funds to put towards like putting funds towards hiring consultants and that sort of thing. So anything that's in the PWP, you can pretty much assume that it's talking about staff time. The one exception to that is when we go after SPR funding, SPR special study funding. We have one of those going on right now in Siler City. I was not planning to apply for that funding for this year because I want to get through this Siler City one before we try to go after any more. This is the first one we've done, and so I'm still trying to figure out the process. So I was not planning to apply for any SPR money for the upcoming year.
Great, thank you, Matt.
Would anyone like to go over any tasks or projects at this time for fiscal year 23? Well, Matt, we're working on the CTP amendment and hopefully the CTP update coming up soon. So yep, that would be the biggest one on the town of Pittsburgh's list.
Yeah, and I think we'll put the Pittsburgh CTP items on there, and we obviously have the ongoing CTP work in Lee County that's kind of been stalled for a while, but I'm hoping we'll be able to get that ramped back up here soon. And then I'm hopeful that I think we're pretty close to the end on the Chatham County CTP sort of wrap up work. So we're going to talk about that, I think, in the next item, but I'm hopeful that one can come off the work program.
So I think you said before that when Chatham County does their next update, that's when they would incorporate Pittsburgh's into it as well, since it wasn't done the first time.
Yeah, so theoretically, the next time the county updates their CTP, which, realistically, you're probably looking 5 to 10 years out from now. The next time they do that, you would probably go ahead and incorporate the stuff from Pittsburgh and just to get it all in one document, so that moving forward, we could just do it all in one thing. That we're actually Pittsburgh is a little bit of an oddball in the state right now in that we're still working on a municipal CTP there. Most areas have gone to doing countywide at this point. And some RPOs have actually gone to doing region-wide where they do the whole RPO at once, which seems like a lot to tackle to me, but
So I guess looking at doing the CTP update, is it worth discussing if it can be incorporated into Chatham counties at that time or not?
in terms of doing a Pittsburgh update, I think
Yeah.
it makes sense to go ahead and do a Pittsburgh update because realistically, I'm not sure it's going to be a while before there's really a need to do an update of the county's CTP, I think. Whereas you've got a lot of stuff going on that needs to be addressed in the shorter term.
No, I meant like, can we go ahead and incorporate it into the county's CTP while we're doing our update? Sorry, that's what I was meaning to ask. Yeah. Because it just seems like there's like a big hole in the county's maps of Pittsburgh. I didn't know if it needed to, if there was an issue with it not being incorporated and waiting another 5 to 10 years.
It's not an issue. It's fine to have it not incorporated. And I would say, you know, let's say we do the Pittsburgh CTP update and, you know, we start it, let's say this year, and it takes, you know, 3 years to get done. So it's adopted in 2025. Chances are good that Chatham County probably wouldn't need a new CTP update until sometime around 2030. And so if we were to take the Pittsburgh stuff and incorporate it into the county stuff, then we'd be essentially making the county do an update and readoption 5 years earlier than they probably would do otherwise. So it's procedurally, it's not a problem to have them separate. It's just kind of hard to explain, you know. It looks funny on a map.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Matt,
Go ahead.
Yes, Julie. Would they also be in different formats as well?
Yeah. So the current Chatham County CTP is in the old format, and your new Pittsburgh CTP would be in the new format. So that creates a whole other set of issues.
And I don't know if the model update would be considered a separate task from this as well, but it looks like we're going to be doing that.
Yeah, I think, you know, the model update is related to the CTP. It's just, it's done by a different group within Julie's group. It's different people. They have a model team that does the model piece of it. And then you'll have a CTP engineer that does the CTP part of it. So I think they're just trying to sort of move ahead with what they can do right now, which is the modeling piece.
Okay.
Hey, Matt, just to build off of what Teresa's talking about, I'm listening. You know, our CTP process that we haven't adopted yet, it started in 2012.
Yeah.
And so it's just been 10 years. So I don't know. I don't want to bog this meeting down on that, but that just makes me think if we are starting a new Pittsburgh process, something to think about maybe. I'm just speaking out of turn there, but that was 10 years ago when it started.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, we've had a number of CTPs in this area just sort of get bogged down and take a really long time to get through the whole process. For Chatham, we started that process in 2012. We adopted in 2016, and here it is 2022. We're hopefully going to finally get the maps corrected and get an actual report for the CTP that we've been waiting 6 years for. So yeah, it's a slow process, and that is definitely something to think about. Yeah.
Hey, Matt, this is Joel. Just out of curiosity on that note, has there been any talk from DOT about, I guess, ever giving up any of the grasp of CTPs to let consultants jump in and help on those? Because I know there's so many limitations with DOT and so much staff turnover and such. Has there been any discussion of that at all?
You know, that's one of those ideas that comes up from time to time. I will say that the current Pittsburgh CTP from 2011 was actually done by a consultant. And it actually, there were some issues because of that. So I think there were, that was another one where it took like 4 or 5 years to get the report done because the consultant didn't like do it right. And then that just, so I think, I mean, Julie, feel free to jump in, but my feeling is that TPD is a little reluctant to use consultants based on the experience they had with doing Pittsburgh back then.
Any other ideas at this time for Matt? Okay. So I guess if you need some additional ideas, if other jurisdictions think of something, they can just reach out to you by a certain time.
And honestly, we'll have the public comment period on this thing open until April. So you can reach out to me anytime between now and April. If you suddenly come up with an idea and say, hey, we really want you to, our community is planning to do a bike and ped plan next year. So, you know, please add it, you know, whatever, anything like that. Hey, our community is going to be working on a airport plan or a transit plan or a whatever.
Sounds good. We'll go to the next item, which is the status of underway studies and plans.
Oh, so one thing I did want to note on the last thing, I forgot I had 2 slides. We are anticipating that the local dues will stay the same for next year. So 9,000 per county. That's what we're planning. Okay. So this is mainly just an open discussion time. We have a number of studies and plans that are underway right now, and I just wanted to kind of get everybody on the same page as far as where things are on the status of these. So the first one to talk about is Chatham County. As we said a few minutes ago, this was actually adopted back in 2016, but the report was never completed. And so, and that was mainly due to staff turnover at DOT at the time. And so, you know, Saman at TPD has been diligently working to try to pull together a report based on, you know, 10-year-old information at this point, trying to figure things out. So she's done a really great job of pulling together the report. It had to go through a whole lot of review because there's been changes about particularly on the bicycle and pedestrian stuff, changes in what documentation needs to happen and all that sort of thing. So it's been a lot of work, but we're very, very, very close to having that done. My expectation is that we will have to get Siler City to readopt the maps because there were some corrections that we made to the maps, but all of the corrections were within Siler City's either inside the town or in their ETJ. And so it should only be Siler City that has to readopt. The county does not have to readopt. And Goldston also does not have to readopt. When I get the okay from Saman that the report is ready to go and the maps are ready to go, I will get in touch with Jack and we will try to get on the schedule to get that local adoption completed. And then once that happens, it'll have to go back to TARPO for us to re-endorse and then back to the Board of Transportation for them to re-adopt. Any questions on that one? All right, moving on to Pittsburgh. So as we said, the current Pittsburgh CTP was adopted back in 2011. It obviously there is a lot going on in Pittsburgh right now that has a lot of impact on sort of the recommended road improvements there. And so we recognized that it was time to request a new CTP. We did make that request last year in February, but due to staff availability limitations, they have not been able to assign it to anybody yet. And we're expecting it'll be a while. We can't really put a date on when that'll start, but my hope would be that hopefully by next winter we will have been able to start, because then we'll be at 2 years since we requested it. But in the meantime, we are also pursuing an amendment to the current CTP. So there are a few roads in the Chatham Park area where there's disagreement between the CTP maps and the small area plan maps for Chatham Park. And so TPD is doing some analysis to sort of check whether the stuff that Chatham Park is proposing is sufficient. And then if it is, then we can make those changes in that section of their CTP. And then there's several other potential amendments that we've discussed. So the ones that are in the current proposed amendment are in what's called the North Village of Chatham Park. Then we've also had some discussions about potential things in the South Village, but I think our current plan is to hold off on doing those until we have the new model and can do the full CTP update. So like Teresa mentioned a couple minutes ago, TPD is planning to get to work on updating the model so that that's ready to go when they have somebody ready to go for the CTP. So so that's where that's at. And Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the amendments we were aiming for, like, spring, summer kind of time frame for adoption of the amendment.
Yes, I think we're saying around 6 months, hopefully. And the South Village small area plan, I would anticipate that to be ready to submit for staff review within, I would say, 8 or 9 months. So you helped a lot on the North Village small area plan, so that might be another task to add for the upcoming work program. Please.
No problem.
Hey, Matt, this is Brandon with Chatham County. I've got a question on some of the updates you've provided here with Pittsburgh's and Chatham County's CTP processes. It's my understanding that at some point this summer with the new census data, we can expect a new UZA to be drawn with the MPO, that is expected to dip further down into Chatham County and potentially be near Pittsburgh or included. Does that have any bearing on this process? Is that something that could impact this?
It very much could impact this. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts here. So I'm not going to try to speculate on whether or not the UZA will dip down and reach Pittsburgh, but when the census does put out the new UZA boundaries, which I can't remember now what the date is on I want to say it's sometime later this year.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think they just the last I had heard, it was like estimated for the summertime.
So once they put those out, the MPOs are required to look at their boundaries, and the MPOs are supposed to include everything that's within the UZA plus what they expect to be within the UZA within 20 years. So that's sort of their their area that they're supposed to include within the MPO. And so I think what is likely to happen is that once those are released, the MPO will probably reach out to Chatham County and to Pittsboro to start having those discussions about potentially moving the boundary. And to the extent that you're within the UZA, yes, you have to be in the MPO. But as far as where that 20 years boundary beyond the UZA is, that is open for negotiation. So just go into it understanding, there are benefits to being in the MPO, there are benefits to being in the RPO. You've got to look at the trade-offs and kind of figure out what works best for you. If, for example, Pittsboro were to end up joining the MPO, then you would fall into the MPO's CTP process, which is totally different and is, I'm not even going to try to explain it, but basically the MPO CTP process is mostly led by whereas on the RPO side, it's more led by TPD with support from the RPO. On the MPO side, it's more led by the MPO with support from TPD. So and they do all of theirs as one big regional CTP. So.
Great, thank you.
All right. In Lee County, obviously the pandemic kind of put a damper on sort of where we were in the process. We were chugging right along, and then pandemic happened, and things kind of slowed dramatically. So where we're at right now, we had worked on the highway recommendations back prior to the pandemic. I've been sort of working some on the bike and ped recommendations. We kept waiting for guidance from DOT. DOT has finally put out some guidance on how to do the bike and ped stuff, and so I'm finally able to get work on documenting all of the bike and ped stuff when I have the time. That's the key thing right now, is finding the time to do it now that they finally released that guidance. But that was one sort of stumbling point. But the likely next steps in that process would be working on the bike ped analysis, working on the cost estimates and fiscal realism analysis, and then getting ready to go out for public engagement. Because we did have, particularly with a few of the highway projects where we, for example, the Jonesboro area, we had a couple of different alternatives, and we need to think through like how to present that to the public and all that sort of thing. So, David, I don't think David's on here. No, David's not on here. So, so yeah, that's where things are with Lee County. Then on Moore County, we did obviously adopt that CTP not too long ago. It was like 2018. But the travel demand model that CTP was based on was developed back around 2013. And so TPD and TARPO have agreed to update the information in the travel demand model so that we'll have a more up-to-date model available for use in that area. And so TARPO's role in that is we're working on the sort of land use socioeconomic data side of it. And then TPD is working on the model network and that side of it. And so we had been waiting for the census numbers to come out. And then we were waiting for my GIS guy here at the COG to have availability. So he now has availability, and we'll be getting started on putting the community viz model together for Moore County so we can develop the updated land use and socioeconomic data. And the goal would be to hopefully have, both sides of that ready to go sometime by the end of this year, so that we'd have a updated model by the end of the year. That's the goal. Any questions on that? There is a bike and ped plan underway in Aberdeen, and that is mainly being handled by the town and the consultant, but I am involved in going to the meetings. There's a meeting tonight, actually. Just wanted to make sure everybody was aware that was going on. I think it's pretty far along in the process. We've got, some recommendations we're reviewing, and I don't know exactly where we are in terms of the final product on that, but
Hey, Matt, this is Brian. We should receive a draft plan soon,
Okay.
according to the consultant.
Good. I figured that was the case since they're doing a public meeting tonight to talk about the recommendations, but I wasn't sure. And then the last one I wanted to talk about is the Second Avenue Corridor Study. This is in Siler City, and this is one of those SPR funded projects that I was talking about. So we did receive some additional money from the state this year to hire a consultant to do this study. So the RPO is the administering the project, and I'm working closely with Jack. We have selected the consultant. I actually just got the final draft of the contract this morning, so we'll be sending that off to DOT for their approval. So Julie, I'll be hopefully sending that to you later today. And hopefully we can get that through that review and approval process with DOT fairly quickly, because we have to get this done by June 30th. So we're a little bit under the gun to get it done. But the project is looking at Second Avenue, which is the CTP for Chatham County recommended doing a road diet on that corridor. And so this study is going to provide us with a little more detailed information about what that road diet might look like, bike lanes, parking, streetscaping, whatever, some more concrete recommendations for that corridor, other than just road diet, which is what the CTP says.
Okay. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Matt on 6C? Okay, moving on then to the second quarter finance update.
So you do have this information in your packet. I don't want to go into details, but if you have any questions in there, please feel free to ask. We have spent $81,379.51 as of mid-year. And if you look at the table on the second page, it'll say that that's 58.9% of our budget. That is only true of the federal funds that we get through DOT plus the 20% match of those funds. So we actually have about $30,000 of local dues that we carried over from previous years that were unspent. And so we actually have more budget. We're really at somewhere right around 50%. So right on track with where we should be. But we will be spending down most, if not all, of that local fund balance that we had carried over previously.
Okay, any questions for Matt? All right, ethics filing requirements is next.
This doesn't affect anybody on this committee, but I know that you sometimes get questions from your RTAC members. So just a heads up that the RTAC members and alternates are required to submit a statement of economic interest and real estate disclosure with the state ethics office every year. The deadline for that is April 15th. I'll be sending out an email probably tomorrow to all of the RTAC members with the link that they need to use. I do highly recommend that they use the online filing. There is a paper version, but it's so much easier to track these things with the online, because pretty much as soon as you submit it, it'll show up in the system and I can see that you've submitted it, which is great. Makes it much easier for me. I think that's all I have on that item.
Any questions for Matt? Okay, last one, STIP updates.
Okay, so we did get a few STIP updates for February. There were not any in January. These were all presented at the board meeting last week. So just as a reminder, these are not official yet. These are the amendments that have been presented to the board for their 30-day review period. They won't be official until next month, but we have a 1-year delay on both the Carthage Street and Fields Drive bike ped projects in Sanford. And according to the document, that is at the request of the city. We have R5709, which is the NC 211 widening from Aberdeen to Rayford, is no longer going to utilize bond funding. So it doesn't change the schedule, it just changes the money. We have a new project, which is a railroad crossing improvement on Corinth Road in Chatham County. That is to add, let me look it up so I get it right here, to add active warning devices. So I'm not sure if that means just lights or if that's lights and gates, but something along those lines. And then the US 64 project in Siler City has a 1-year delay in its right of way, but no change to construction.
Okay, any questions for Matt on that? Alrighty, so next on the agenda is member updates. So anyone have anything they'd like to share with the group? Matt, I was going to update you on our sidewalk project on Chatham Business Drive.
Mhm.
So we're looking at engineering firms right now. And we've also requested an extension to December of 2022 from DOT, since it took a few months to kind of get everything going.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have anything else they'd like to go over with Matt and the group? All right, so our next meeting will be on April the 14th. So we're not sure if it'll be in person or virtual. Do you think it might be a hybrid if it is in person, or?
If it is in person, what we have said previously is that we would continue to offer virtual as an option. That was something that last summer, when things looked like they were opening back up, that was one of the requests, was to continue to offer a virtual option. So like I said last meeting, we're gonna kind of follow the lead of TJCOG. So their board is still meeting virtually. And when they go back to in-person, we will also go back to in-person.
Okay, I think the virtual is working pretty well. But, or yeah, the virtual, I mean, if we were to meet in person, there's benefits to that too, but I think it's going pretty well. Well, if there's nothing else to discuss, is there anything else you have, Matt?
That is all I have.
Okay, well then I guess we will recess the meeting and see everybody back for the RTAC meeting at noon.
And as a reminder, it is a separate link for the RTAC meeting. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, see you in a little bit.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Teresa.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Matt, it's Kathy.
Hey.
I'm really remote today, so I may not be able to hang out for the entire or any of the RTAC meeting, but I will try to link in with that one as well.
Okay. That's
So,
fine.